In the 1940s, America executed Nazi scientists for the human experimentation they did in World War II. This was following the Nuremberg trials. Then, just a few years later, they hired some of those same scientists that they didn't execute to perform experiments on American service members, and then they covered it up. And that's what this video is all about. Isn't that right?
Yep. Can't wait to hear more.
I love that chipper tone. It's a horror-toned video. It's a cover-up. It's a government cover-up.
What's next?
1968, an 18-year-old by the name of Tim Josephs thought he was testing Army field jackets. The young man from Pittsburgh arrived at Edgewood Arsenal in Maryland for what he had been told was a 2-month assignment evaluating military equipment. Field jackets.
In well-equipped scientific laboratories, highly competent scientists and engineers explore many important lines of inquiry. Their primary purpose, to cope successfully with chemical warfare.
To him, the base looked wrong from the start. He's quoted as saying, "It did not look like a military base," he recalled years later. He said it looked more like a hospital. Upon his arrival, Tim had second thoughts immediately, and an officer pulled him aside and said, "You volunteered for this, you are going to do it, and if you do not, you will go to jail. If you don't go to jail, you're going to go to Vietnam. Either way, now or after this." Guy's kind of a dick. On February 1st, 1968, Tim received an injection, and his partial medical records, which were obtained decades later, showed that he was treated with the drug P2S that same day, which is a treatment for organophosphate poisoning, the same kind of poisoning that you would get from sarin gas, aka a weapon of mass destruction. And in his mid-50s, Tim Josephs was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. He retired early, and medications for that cost $2,000 a month out of pocket. It's the exact same disease that my grandfather died from. Rest in peace. Seemed like a joke. I'm sorry. I did not mean to make it seem like a joke. So that's a tragedy. And unfortunately, from 1948 to 1975, the United States Army used approximately 7,000 American soldiers as test subjects for at least 254 different chemicals, nerve agents, psychedelics, incapacitating drugs that could leave a man hallucinating for days. And the most important part is that the soldiers were not told what they were being given. They did not give consent to being poisoned by the government, just so you guys are aware. Now, of course, they are called volunteers. Any of them weren't even told that they were being experimented on at all, and that is this story. Edgewood Arsenal sits in Harford County, Maryland, roughly 25 miles northeast of Baltimore in the Aberdeen Proving Ground. The U.S. Army established it in 1918 as a chemical weapons manufacturing and testing facility during World War I, the Great War. By the time World War II ended, it had become the center of American chemical warfare research, and it would stay that way for decades.
I saw just a few of these special masks, one for military personnel, one for non-combatants, an infant protector.
On June 28, 1918, President Wilson, if that is, I'm not sure if this even was a president, directed the establishment of the CWS, or Chemical Warfare Service, with the goal of researching and producing chemical weapons for both offensive and defensive purposes. 4 years later, in October of 1922, the CWS created a medical research division at Edgewood to study defenses against chemical agents. The formal authority to recruit and use volunteer subjects in chemical warfare experiments was initiated in 1942. The facility sprawled across thousands of acres of Maryland wetland. Beautiful, beautiful country. Had old family farm back there. Ross Perot bought it, built a Six Flags on it. Bullshit! Upper Marble up there, come on. At that Six Flags, you ever been at Six Flags in there? That's my you danced on my graves, my ancestors, you There were laboratories, test chambers, and barracks for volunteers, and areas that were off limit to anyone without the highest clearance, where the most dangerous experiments took place in the facility. By 1948, Edgewood had a new mission. The Nazis had developed 3 nerve gases during World War II, tabun, soman, and sarin. And though they'd never used them on a massive scale, they were prepared to. And as a result of this, American military researchers had obtained the formulas of these weapons of mass destruction that were created by the Nazis, and they wanted to understand these weapons. How do you understand a weapon? You test it on people. And they also wanted to develop their own versions, and they needed obviously, human test subjects. So, the end of World War II, we have the Cold War. In 1949, the Soviet Union successfully detonated its first nuclear weapon. The Cold War escalated from political posturing to both sides posing an existential threat to the other. And American military planners believed that World War III was not just possible, but likely. And many strategies were being developed to prepare for such an event if it ever came to pass. So from that point on, the impending possibility of nuclear conflict was felt throughout America, with even elementary schools conducting nuclear war drills.
Find cover immediately. Don't look at the flash. Stretch out. In about 1 minute, the immediate danger is past. Then head for safer cover.
Intelligence reports suggested that Soviets were developing chemical weapons and biological weapons alongside their nuclear arsenal. The Korean War began in 1950 with American troops fighting Chinese forces in horrible, disturbing conditions. It is the forgotten war for a reason. It is unbelievable. It's a rabbit hole of horror. And in that war, the specter of chemical attacks hung over almost every single battle. And at Edgewood Arsenal, the research took on a new urgency during this time.
A harmless chemical agent was introduced. The cat's behavior became temporarily frightened, defensive, contrary to his normal behavior.
This isn't academic science. It is preparation for a war that could kill millions of people, with some estimates of casualties in the Soviet Union ranging from 84 to 115 million people, or between 33 and 45% of the population of the Soviet Union if war were to break out on a large scale. The men running this chemical weapons program believed that they were protecting the nation. They believed the ends justified the means, and that is how they justified experimenting on American soldiers. The only problem is finding soldiers and people to experiment on who are okay with it, because we have like a constitution and autonomy and stuff, allegedly, or whatever. Really difficult to go up to a guy and like Lord Farquaad say, some of you may die, but this is for the good of America, kind of. This is for the generations to come and stuff. Nah, cover up. By 1955, the Chemical Corps had a framework for human experimentation. We have that at Sour Boys. But they couldn't get enough volunteers. The solution for them was to recruit enlisted men stationed at Army installations near Edgewood. The pitch was carefully crafted. Soldiers were told they'd be testing military equipment, protective clothing, new field jackets, weapons. They were promised amazing incentives like small monetary allowances of about $1.50 a day, some light duties like cleaning the latrine, and also having almost every weekends free. It was a plum assignment, as Tim Josephs would later describe it. Light work, comparatively speaking. Frank Rochelle, a serviceman from North Carolina, heard the same promises in 1968. We were lied to about our reasons for going to Edgewood, he said, decades later. We thought the Army was testing equipment to better the forces, but alas, it was a cover-up, and he was being experimented on with WMDs. They were using the American government was experimenting on these people with WMDs. Pretty epic. In another interview, he stated, "We volunteered, yes, but we were not fully aware of the dangers. None of us knew the kind of drugs they gave us or the after effects that they would have." Shell served from 1968 to 1970, including a tour in Vietnam, and he volunteered for Edgewood, expecting an easy temporary assignment. He didn't know he was about to become a test subject for hallucinogenic drugs. Not only WMDs, but also drugs. Volunteers arrived for assignments lasting 1 to 2 months. They signed consent forms. The forms said that they would be participating in research. The forms did not say that they would be injected with nerve agents, given LSD without warning, or exposed to chemicals that could leave them incapacitated for days. Now, obviously, all this stuff is out now, and the Army's position and later the Department of Veterans Affairs position in 2006 was that these men volunteered. They signed papers, they consented to be tested on by the government with nerve agents, apparently.
The program consists of complete volunteer participation.
An Army investigation would later characterize the recruiting process and informed consent approach as suggesting possible coercion. That is the word the investigation used, coercion. Seems more likely than just being like, "You're gonna put what in me? Sarin gas?" That sounds pretty good. Fill me up. Let's take the example of James Stanley, a master sergeant stationed at Fort Knox, Kentucky. He volunteered for a program described as testing the effectiveness of protective clothing and equipment against chemical warfare. He was transferred to Aberdeen Proving Grounds in Maryland, the same complex that includes Edgewood. Stanley was given a clear liquid and told to drink it 4 times a month. He wasn't told what was in the clear liquid. He wasn't told that the liquids contained LSD. The after effects of the consumption of LSD came on quite fast for Stanley. Hallucinations, periods of incoherence, memory loss, and something even worse. Stanley would also awake from sleep at night and, without reason, violently beat his wife and children, and he wouldn't be able to recall the incidents afterwards. Stanley was discharged from the Army in 1969, and his marriage dissolved the following year, supposedly directly because of the changes caused by the LSD, which he claims left him in an altered behavioral and emotional state for an extended period of time. And he did not learn about these experiments until 1975, when the Army contacted him about a follow-up study. Even an assessment of potential long-term health effects on Army human test subjects from 2016 backed up the things Stanley claimed as documented side effects. Depression was reported in 4% of LSD-exposed subjects, personality changes in 2% of LSD-exposed subjects, anxiety and nightmares in 2% of LSD-exposed subjects, and paranoia in 1% of LSD-exposed subjects, along with dissociative episodes and memory loss in 2% of LSD-exposed subjects. Basically, it was bad. The chemicals that were tested on the men fell into several categories. One was acetylcholinesterase, which is a bunch of different nerve agents, VX, sarin, tabin, soman. I'm not sure if I'm saying those last two right. Comment down below. Thank you for the engagement. Either way, these are the same nerve gases the Nazis had developed in World War II, compounds that disrupt the nervous system, which then cause muscle paralysis, seizures, and even death at high doses. Then there were incapacitating agents, aka BZ, or 3-quinylindolbenzolate, which is a substance that could cause delirium and hallucinations lasting up to 96 hours. The Army wanted a drug that could possibly disable enemy troops without killing them. Then there were the psychoactive agents, the more fun ones, as my old buddy George would say. LSD, PCP, mescaline derivatives, THC compounds, etc., all mind-altering substances tested for potential use in interrogation and psychological warfare. People actually do those. That's the big difference. Nobody really does nerve agents nowadays. There were also blister agents like mustard gas and other vesicants left over from World War I. Those are chemicals that burn the skin, eyes, and respiratory tract. Stuff that's against the Geneva Convention, or whatever, the Geneva Suggestion, as the U.S. Army would call it, I guess. I think probably, or what people on Reddit call it. Millennials on Reddit.
Geneva Suggestion, given the history of the United States.
After World War II, American military scientists inherited the Nazi nerve gas program. The Germans had developed tabin in 1936, sarin in 1938, and soman in 1944. And these organophosphate compounds attacked the nervous system by inhibiting acetylcholinesterase, which is an enzyme essential for nerve function. Without it, nerves fire continuously, muscles seize up, victims suffocate as their respiratory systems fail.
The chest muscles are among the first to be affected. They feel tight, unable to relax. They cannot perform their work of pumping air in and out of the lungs. They are growing weaker. Breathing will stop entirely, and this man will die.
And as we know, scientists at Edgewood tested them on American soldiers. M. Joseph's medical records indicated that he received treatment for organophosphate poisoning on February 1st, 1968. His lawyer, Gordon Erspamer, reviewing the partial records and coming to the conclusion that Joseph's probably received an injection of sarin gas, or sarin liquid, I suppose. And the experiments weren't always injections. Some involved skin exposure with drops of the nerve agents applied to the skin to observe how easily the chemicals would be absorbed by a human. Other experiments used inhalation chambers where soldiers breathed in controlled concentrations of the chemicals to see what would happen. And munitions were even manufactured to deliver the agents to targets, and they were tested on groups of American troops.
Here at Fort Campbell, Kentucky in 1963, Troop Test Water Bucket 1 indicated that Riot Control Agent CS was a potentially effective tactical weapon that could be employed both offensively and defensively.
The VX agent, another compound that was developed in Britain in 1952 and later produced at Edgewood, where recruits were subjected to it, was the absolute deadliest of them all. A single drop on the skin could kill an adult, but the Army tested it anyway. After the experiments, if symptoms became too severe, researchers would administer atropine, which is the antidote for a nerve gas, and then they would record how quickly the soldier would recover. Then they'd calculate the exposure threshold and plan the next test with a slightly higher dose. Look at this particular information of a high-dose study group that required less atropine in the first 24 hours, but still more than half needed intubation at the hospital. What? Now, the stated purpose of this defensive research was to understand how these weapons could work so American troops could be protected from them in battle, but the tests went further than protection, obviously. Scientists were measuring how much exposure soldiers could survive. They were finding the human limits of these nerve gases. Very Nazi of them. Interesting. It's almost like maybe those scientists were Nazi scientists. And it's almost like that's a thing as well. Paperclips. Look it up. One report from 1949, an internal one, spelled out the philosophy. Luther Wilson Green, technical director of the Chemical and Radiological Laboratories at Edgewood, produced a classified paper titled Psychochemical Warfare, a New Concept of War. Green called for a search for novel compounds that would create debilitating mental side effects without lethal effects. Take BZ, for example, the incapacitator. In 1960, Edgewood Arsenal began investigating a new class of chemical weapons, not lethal agents, but incapacitating agents. The goal was to disable enemy troops without killing them. The centerpiece of this research was 3-quinylclindinyl benzylate, aka BZ. Dr. James Ketchum arrived at Edgewood and eventually became head of the psychochemical research program, and years later, journalists would call him Dr. Delirium. Ketchum didn't see it that way. He thought he was working on a noble cause. It's quite literally his own quote, because the purpose of this research was to find something that would be an alternative to bombs and bullets. So, make everybody crazy and delirious, like those mirror guns we used on Maduro security guards to make them shit and vomit. And puke. And then we stole him out of the darkness of the night and made him wear 7 different outfits in 24 hours. Poor guy. Listening to this guy talk is really awesome. He seems like a really trustworthy guy with the best intentions of the people of the United States of America, especially young recruits in the Army.
Other subjects are more stoical, and although they are clearly bewildered and perplexed by what is going on inside their heads, they accept this without any particular outward show of distress.
BZ is an anticholinergic compound like the other ones. It blocks acetylcholine receptors in the brain, which disrupts neuronal communications and makes people twist and shout. The effects are severe and prolonged. Subjects become delirious and disoriented. They hallucinate. They picked at their clothing and at their bodies, at the air. This bizarre behavior resulted in a phenomenon that researchers called wool gathering. Many recipients of this compound couldn't perform basic tasks for days after. Maximal doses produced stupor within 3 hours and complete performance decrement within 4. What followed was protracted sleepiness, disorganized behavior, continuous hallucinations, outbursts of fear and anger, and full-on delirium. Symptoms could last 72 hours before subsiding, and full recovery took up to 120 hours. That's 5 days. References to Ketchum's work on the National Library of Medicine in regards to BZ refer to the test subjects as informed military personnel, though that's debated. Informed military personnel.
So I get a hamburger today?
Yeah, you're going to get a hamburger. Drink this clear liquid. The declassified Army films showed what all this looked like. In one sequence, a man sits in a chair while a researcher asks him a simple question about his experience. He feels incapacitated. He's rubbing his eyes, holding his head and rocking back and forth.
I feel incapacitated.
Another disturbing video shows a soldier struggling to answer simple math questions, saying he feels like he's in 2 worlds.
Can you subtract 7 from 92?
The last one's not that tragic compared to the other one. The other one's a lot worse. That one just seems like he wasn't that good at math. But so that's the fun part about having too much choline in your body, or reuptake. prevention of I forget. I'm not sure. Funny story, we accidentally kind of sarin gassed ourselves because before we started Sour Boys, my buddy Forrest, who helped me create the original recipe for Sour Boys, for our OG strips back in 2023, before we started Sour Boys, we tried creating a energy drink, and Forrest accidentally put 10 times the amount of Huperzine A in the drink that you're supposed to have. And Huperzine A, like sarin gas, is a acetylcholinesterase inhibitor. They both do the exact same thing, where your body just has a bunch of acetylcholine. Forrest drank it, got really sick, threw up everywhere, and then went home and went for like all day basically, but then he was fine. He was fine after, because Huperzine A is obviously not quite as potent as sarin gas, but similar thing happens. Too much of it exists in your brain because the enzyme that breaks it down is inhibited, and that's what Huperzine A does. And it's in like a lot of, like Gorilla Mind, it's in a bunch of different energy drinks. I don't even drink energy drinks. I don't know why the fuck we tried making one, but accidentally sarin gassed himself. Anyways, another soldier experienced a similar inability to control his thoughts in an experiment where he was answering questions over a headset in an isolated room, where he claimed he was unable to remember a single thing.
Carl, what day is it? I can't remember a thing. I can't remember.
Soldiers were unable to function independently, needing assistance to just stand up or to walk several paces and even to sit down. This was not torture in the traditional sense. No one was screaming, no one was being beaten, but watching young men lose their grip on reality while researchers take notes is kind of horrifying, to be honest. And of course, they knew all about this before they even did the research. They didn't really learn shit. Internal documents showed researchers were aware of all the risks. They knew BZ could incapacitate subjects for several days. They knew that nerve agents could cause permanent neurological damage. They tested these substances on soldiers anyway and recorded the results in clinical detail. One 1964 field test, codenamed Project Dork, deployed aerosolized BZ at the Dugway Proving Ground in Utah. That's right, guys. Project Dork. 8 volunteers were exposed to the chemical from distances of 500 to 1,000 yards during combat simulation exercises.
The test subject stood on the back of a flatbed truck that attempted to move with the cloud. Despite all this, it became difficult to maintain enough chemical to disperse, even though there were only 8 soldiers ultimately who had to breathe it in.
And the purpose of this was to determine whether or not BZ could incapacitate soldiers in a real battlefield condition. It could. Then, from 1956 to 1967, Dr. Van Murray Sim supervised an LSD testing program at Edgewood, where Sim was the founder and director of the Medical Research Volunteer Program. All this stuff extremely tied in with MKUltra, by the way, and all of the classic CIA conspiracies, Project What's-Her-Name, and Bluebeam, and Mockingbird, none of those, neither of those. Project, I forget what it's called, Sunray, or Solar Beam, or they're cool names, to be honest, but this fellow believed the experiments were totally safe. He said the tests were without consequence in an interview years later. The soldiers who received LSD without warning would disagree. James Stanley's case became one of the most famous. He received 4 injections of LSD in February of 1958, none of which he was told about. And Stanley is not alone. Steve Bonner is another test subject from 1967 who claimed that his entire personality completely changed from being a passive before being experimented on to being an aggressive person with a hair-trigger temper afterwards. He even threw his wife through a sheetrock wall.
Literally, I've thrown plates. I've put my wife through a wall, through the sheetrock wall when I've lost my temper, and thank God she wasn't hurt.
The Army's psychedelic testing extended well beyond LSD. Researchers also administered PCP, mescaline derivatives, and various cannabis synthetics, like K2, which you can buy at your local convenience store. Use code OOMPA. Just kidding. That's not real. The stated goal was to develop drugs that could be used in an interrogation or psychological warfare chemicals that would break down mental resistance without leaving physical evidence of torture. A man by the name of Frank Rochelle learned years later that he'd been given a drug called CAR 302668, which is described in his medical records as a deliriant drug. It was developed in the 1960s. He also temporarily lost sight in one of his eyes. Now, what about the blister agents like the old mustard gas? The oldest chemicals in Edgewood's arsenal, these dated back to World War I. Now, although it sounds delicious, mustard gas, or sulfur mustard, is not. It was first used as a weapon in 1917. It burns the skin, eyes, and respiratory tract. Exposure can cause blisters, temporary or permanent blindness, and severe lung damage. And at Edgewood, soldiers were still being exposed to it in the 1960s. Now, the testing protocols involved applying small quantities of these chemical agents to the skin, measuring absorption rates, and burn development. Other tests exposed soldiers to mustard vapor in sealed chambers, monitoring how long until symptoms appeared. There was even one instance of direct application to an individual's eyes. Now, this is from World War I. This was used in a war. This had been studied for decades, and there was actually, why are you testing it on people in the 60s, man? This data is not that useful. Really. It burns people. What the hurts them bad. The end. I knew that. As soon as I figured out it wasn't mustard, I figured that shit out. Had nothing to do with mustard. The soldiers weren't told at the time exactly what was going on, and many weren't told at all, and some not until decades later. But luckily for the sake of lawyers, the Army documents basically everything, but they did make the documentation nearly impossible to access for quite a while. Each experiment was assigned a code designation. Chemicals had alphanumeric identifiers EA1298, CAR 302668, K agents, G agents. When veterans later tried to understand what they'd been exposed to, they found medical records filled with meaningless codes and nonsensical gibberish. JSON. Then in 2017, as a part of a legal settlement, the Army agreed to provide veterans with information about their exposures, but the notification letters were, in Frank Rochel's words, so generic that veterans learned little useful information. There was a lot of obfuscation going on, which is classic government. Also, anything the government documents or espouses during wartime is not real. Vietnam, 1960s. World War II, 1940s. Korean War, 1950s. World War I, 1910s. Gulf War, 1990s. Iraq War, early 2000s. War in Afghanistan, mid-2000s to late 2000s, early 2010s. So many wars. Talking about these wars reminds me of this British guy that I see sometimes on Instagram where he's like, all we need to do is we need to get everybody to stop war. We need to find peace on earth. And that's what I'm trying to do. I've become vegan to try and bring peace on earth. And he's like this really muscular, handsome guy, and he just seems so dumb. And I can't believe how dumb he seems. And I feel bad when I'm like, this guy's realizing that peace is good right now. He's like 40, and he's building his platform on peace. We just need to stop the war. How, you think? Oh, I think just if everybody came together and they realized they just need to stop. If you just decided to not fight. Oh, I found him.
And stuff like that. We just bring it down to one law and one law only and one rule that we can all understand. Can't be complicated and can't be changed, and it's do no harm.
My idea is do no harm. Do no harm. One law, no more laws, only one, do no harm.
Hey man, that's illegal anyways. Did you know that that's already illegal?
Let's simplify everything down into one law so I can understand it. And I have an idea. I'd like to run the world. The only law is do no harm.
Genius. High level, dude. First person to ever think about that. I'm basically Jesus Christ. So we know a bit now. All right, they're doing bad stuff. They're documenting it. They're testing nerve gases and horrific agents on members of the United States government who aren't fully keyed in on what exactly is going on. But did somebody die? Somebody seems like they had to have died. The Army claims that no one died at Edgewood, but the same program, the same researchers, the same chemicals, and the same methods did kill at least one person. A fellow by the name of Harold Blower, a professional tennis player from New York. This shit is so evil. In late 1952, Harold checked into the New York State Psychiatric Institute seeking help for depression after a divorce, a classic cause of depression. Unfortunately, Harold did not realize that the Army had a classified agreement with this facility to test potential chemical warfare compounds on patients when animal testing was found to be insufficient. Between November of 1952 and January of 1953, Blauer received multiple injections of mescaline derivatives to treat his depression. These are experimental compounds at the time that the Army was evaluating for use in interrogations. This all given the previous Nazi use of mescaline as a truth drug. He complained of strong hallucinations and experienced violent tremors, unable to control his limbs, and he asked to withdraw from the treatments. Then, on January 8th, 1953, a researcher injected Blauer with 450 milligrams of a compound called EA-1298. Within minutes, Blauer began frothing at the mouth with his teeth clenched and ultimately fell into a coma. Despite attempts to save him, his pulse and blood pressure dropped, and he died less than 2.5 hours after the drug was administered to him. The Army immediately moved to conceal its involvement and began a cover-up. Records were altered, the medical examiner placed all of the records in a confidential file, and officials promoted a false narrative that Blauer died from an underlying heart condition while keeping the Army's role in Blauer's death a classified secret for a long time. The truth did not emerge until 1975 when the Army finally disclosed that they'd sponsored the drug test that killed him. Blauer's daughters sued for $8.5 million in their father's wrongful death, and in 1987 a federal judge awarded his estate $7 million and described Blauer as a guinea pig whose medical records had been tampered with to disguise the actual cause of death. The same chemicals, the same program, the same researchers, just a slightly different facility. So they obviously knew clearly. That's what the documents showed. The researchers at Edgewood were not stumbling into unknown territory. They understood the risks of the chemicals that they were testing. They documented the severe reactions, and they just kept on doing it anyway. And remember, when Tim Josephs had second thoughts about his volunteering and tried to leave, he was threatened with jail and or immediate deployment to Vietnam. On top of that, the consent forms that soldiers signed did not describe what they'd actually experienced, and the volunteers were often soldiers with limited options, lured by promises of easy duty and extra leave and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. For the United States government, it was research. For the subjects, they're just guinea pigs. And I named my guinea pig Vin Diesel. That's a fun fact. So, thus begins the cover-up. Frank Rochelle, a fellow we've talked about quite a few times, a Edgewood subject, sought medical help from the VA in the 1970s, and when he mentioned Edgewood, he was told the tests never happened. His records were sealed, he couldn't prove anything, and he couldn't even tell his doctors what chemicals he might have been exposed to. Another soldier, David Dufresne, was also told that Edgewood never happened after trying to get medical care in 1986. He was told that he was hallucinating and he was making things up, which is pretty rude to a guy who was experimented on for a long time by the United States government. The dam of the cover-up began to crack in December of 1974 when the New York Times investigative reporter Seymour Hersh published an article detailing illegal actions of the intelligence apparatus, like the CIA, against U.S. citizens. What the I love that. I love it whenever the intelligence apparatus is used on its own citizens. It's for national security, guys! For national security! And bananas. Banana corporations. And other it's for corporate security, maybe. Congressional hearings into intelligence agency abuses revealed the existence of MKUltra, which there's been plenty of videos about that. It's the CIA's mind control program, or as they call it, behavioral modification. MK does not stand for mind control, with a K, by the way. Then as investigators dug deeper, connections emerged between CIA experiments and military research at Edgewood Arsenal. In September of 1975, the medical research volunteer program at Edgewood was formally discontinued, and all resident volunteers were removed from the installation, with Dr. Van Murray Sim, who had supervised the LSD testing program. He was called before Congress and chastised by lawmakers who questioned the absence of follow-up care for the human volunteers. The experiments were over, the cover-up was beginning. Edgewood Arsenal wasn't the only place experimenting on unwitting Americans. The CIA had its own program. MKUltra began in 1953, and it was a CIA mind control program that tested LSD and other psychoactive substances on unwitting subjects, with mental patients and ordinary citizens being drugged and having no idea that they were the subject of some big evil government plot to control the minds of Americans. The programs absolutely overlapped. Some of the same chemicals tested at Edgewood were also used in MKUltra experiments, with the goal being the same: develop drugs that could be used for interrogation, psychological warfare, or to incapacitate enemies, or control the populace, so on and so forth. 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered the destruction of MKUltra files. For some reason, that's a red flag. It's like that scene from SpongeBob where he's like, burn the memories, or what is it? What is it from SpongeBob? I don't know. That was a bad reference. I apologize. You guys can take the like away from this video. Or you can give me a pity like. Most of the MKUltra records were burned. Approximately 20,000 documents survived and were only discovered later in misfiled financial records, which is hilarious. Both of these programs were absolutely covered up, and when Congress began investigating in 1975, investigators found gaps everywhere. They found files that should have existed were gone. Researchers claimed not to remember details. The paper trail had been deliberately severed by the powers that be. Andrew Bustamante. Compared to the MKUltra files, the Edgewood files fared slightly better. Many survived because they were stored in different locations, but still significant gaps remain. And veterans seeking information about their exposures often find that the relevant files are unavailable or incomplete to this very day. Tons of records totally destroyed, and other pieces of critical information like social security numbers, things like that, important data to determine who had what happened to them. It's just missing. Now, the obvious massive red flag here is the whole Operation Paperclip Nazi connection. The Edgewood Arsenal experiments didn't develop in just American isolation. They started in Nazi Germany. I've mentioned Operation Paperclip multiple times. If you don't know, it was the U.S. program to recruit German scientists after World War II. Now, of course, the official story is that Nazi party members and active Nazi supporters were excluded. Aside from Werner von Braun, of course, unofficially, the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency whitewashed incriminating evidence to bring in scientists they wanted. In fact, about half of the early specialists had connections with the Nazi party guys because they're just all Nazis. Of course they wanted them. It just would look bad. Journalist Linda Hunt, citing records from the U.S. National Archives, revealed that at least 8 former Nazis worked at the Edgewood Arsenal under Operation Paperclip. It's all one big game, guys. Among them was Dr. Friedrich Fritz Hoffmann, who during the war synthesized poison gases and toxins for the Luftwaffe's Technical Research Institute in Berlin. His experience with truth serums and nerve gas for the Nazi SS made him very valuable to American researchers. And instead of doing it to their enemies, we just did it to our own men. Fritz arrived at Edgewood in 1947 and helped the U.S. military replicate sarin and tabun gases. There was objectively a pervasive Nazi influence in the early Edgewood Arsenal program. After World War II, the United States executed Nazi doctors at Nuremberg for conducting medical experiments on concentration camp prisoners. Then they hired some of those same Nazi-affiliated scientists to conduct medical experiments on American soldiers and just not tell them and just cover it up. That's pretty awesome, guys. America moment. But that is not all, somehow. Japan's Unit 731, which we did a video about a few months ago, conducted biological warfare experiments on Chinese civilians during World War II. Unbelievably horrific. Things like vivisection without anesthesia, deliberate infection with plague, cholera, and anthrax. Also, frostbite studies where prisoners' limbs were frozen and then amputated. The death toll from Unit 731 in World War II is highly disputed, but it ranges from thousands to hundreds of thousands. If you want to see a full video on that, we have one. It's linked right here. Eerily similar details between the Operation Paperclip, Unit 731, and what happened at Edgewood and MKUltra. It's just evil, basically. When the Nuremberg trials were going down in the European theater and the Pacific theater after the war, General Douglas MacArthur struck a deal. The United States would grant immunity to Unit 731's leaders, including Commanding Officer General Shiro Ishii, in exchange for exclusive American access to their research data. So the U.S. was playing all sides, basically. They prosecuted Nazi doctors at Nuremberg and then granted them immunity, gave them houses, and made them do research in America with Operation Paperclip. Then they also concealed Unit 731's crimes and granted immunity to the perpetrators of that. Dr. Shiro Ishii, one of the most evil to ever live, quietly returned to private practice in Japan and died of throat cancer at the age of 67 in 1959. He never faced trial for any experiments that killed thousands of people. And many of Unit 731's doctors went on to prominent careers. For example, president of the Japanese Medical Association, head of the Japanese Olympic Committee, the governor of Tokyo. Well, at least we got research data from it, right? Wrong. It was worthless. The vivisection of human beings did not yield any better scientific data than the animal experiments that it replaced. Turns out, evil all across the board. So the Army and CIA experimented on thousands of soldiers with dangerous drugs during the Cold War. After World War II, they experimented using researchers from the Nazi Party, research from Japan, Unit 731, and then covered it all up when they got found out. And only recently have there been payouts for the people who were told that the experiments never existed. The soldiers who survived Edgewood are aging, and many are already gone. It's been 50, 60 years. As of 2024, veterans exposed to hallucinogens and nerve agents in secret experiments are still somehow having to fight for back pay on their disability benefits. It's just a travesty in general, the way that veterans are treated by the United States government after giving their service to the, fulfilling their oath to this country that gives them freedom or whatever the This is another level past just the normalcy. A bill called the Oath Act was recently introduced to lift a requirement that veterans apply for benefits within 1 year of leaving military service. That restriction would be waived for former service members who participated in secrecy oath programs like Edgewood, which is good. Frank Rochelle, one of the guys we've talked about continuously in this video, now in his 80s, remains an advocate for this, and he said, "I was experiencing health problems before the oath was lifted, but was not able to file a claim for compensation." He told reporters in 2024, "Compensation should not be timed to when the secrecy oath ended because injuries were incurred prior to that." Yeah. The Oath Act was introduced again back in May 2025, and a hearing was scheduled for and held on December 10th, just last month. But according to the bill tracker, it looks like it's still a long way off of the 5-step process the American government introduced, passed Senate, passed House, to President, become law. It is still only on the introduced step. Not a lot of interest in it. Not enough money to answer it all. The Department of Veteran Affairs formally does recognize Edgewood/Aberdeen exposures as qualifying service-related events, so veterans can file claims for disability compensation for health problems related to the testing, but claims are decided on an individual basis. It is case by case, and it is bureaucracy, so it's dog shit. So beyond that, the full scope of the Edgewood experiments, just like MKUltra, just like Unit 731, all the shit in history, we will not ever know because that information is destroyed, and that was from a time in which information could be actually destroyed. It's much harder now. Look at the Epstein files. Look at all this stuff. There's millions of files on that. Imagine how many there would be on MKUltra if they were still doing it. Maybe they are still doing it. Who knows? There are still records that remain classified from it. Files were destroyed, obviously. So yeah, it's not looking good. And the men who ran the experiments are pretty much all dead. Dr. James Ketchum died in 2019. Dr. Van Murray Sim died in 1995. The institutional knowledge of what happened at Edgewood is disappearing and completely irrelevant. They didn't learn shit, and now all the test subjects are dying. So it's really just overall a bleak, dark situation. That's why I made a video about it. Anyways, thanks for watching. If you guys enjoyed, press the like button, and I'll see you in the next one.